Okay, so today we're going to do a deep dive into something I think you'll find pretty relevant to your life today. The legacy of Friedrich Hayek.
Oh,
You
yeah.
ever heard of him?
Of course, Hayek. Yeah, big name.
Yeah, so this guy was an economist who wrote a really, really influential book
Hmm.
called The Road to Serfdom.
Yeah, very influential.
Have you read that one?
I have, yeah.
Okay, great. So for our listeners out there who haven't read it,
Definitely worth checking out.
it really kind of shaped how a lot of people saw the world, and especially politicians and thinkers in the 20th century.
Yeah, it's still debated today.
Oh, absolutely. And so that's kind of what we're going to explore in this deep dive is sort of, how his ideas have kind of been interpreted and maybe even misinterpreted over time. And particularly, we're going to focus on the neoliberal movement, which claims to follow in his footsteps.
Right.
And for folks who might not be super familiar with that term,
Yeah, good point.
what does neoliberalism actually mean?
It's a big word, and people throw it around a lot.
Yeah.
At its core, it's an economic philosophy that kind of emerged in the mid-20th century.
Mm-hmm.
Really emphasizes free markets,
Okay.
minimal government regulation, and this idea that individual choice is kind of paramount.
Okay, so very much kind of like a hands-off approach to the economy.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So we're going to be looking at whether the very system that Hayek's followers championed with its focus on free markets and limited government might have actually created a different kind of serfdom.
Oh, interesting.
One where corporations and financial giants hold a lot of sway over our lives.
Yeah, that's a really compelling question, and that's really what we're going to be unpacking today.
Yeah, and it's I think a journey full of twists and turns,
Absolutely,
which makes it even more interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's start with Hayek's main point in The Road to Serfdom.
Okay.
So he wrote this book way back in 1944
Mm-hmm.
when the world was still dealing with World War II
Right.
and kind of the looming threat of communism.
A lot of fear around that at the time.
Oh, absolutely. And so Hayek was, he was really worried about socialist and communist ideas gaining ground.
He saw them as a threat.
Yeah, a direct threat to freedom.
Absolutely.
Individual freedom.
Yeah, his core argument was that any kind of government planning, even things like social programs that seem kind of harmless on the surface,
Mm-hmm.
would ultimately put too much power in the hands of the state.
So even things like expanding welfare or creating regulations for industries,
Oh.
even if they were meant to make society fairer.
Yeah, he saw it as a slippery slope
A slippery slope.
to a government that controls everything,
Okay, wow. So he was really against any kind of government intervention in the economy.
pretty much. Yeah,
Yeah.
he believed that central planning would squash innovation,
Mm-hmm.
limit choices, and basically create a society where the government was calling all the shots.
So it's like he was saying the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Like, even if you're trying to do good things, if you give the government too much power, it's going to end badly.
Exactly. He thought it would lead to tyranny.
But here's the thing that I find so interesting.
Okay.
After the war, a lot of Western countries saw their economies grow a lot, and living standards improved significantly.
Right.
And a lot of this was thanks to the kinds of government actions that Hayek was totally against.
You're right. It's an interesting historical point.
Like Keynesian economics, where
Yeah.
the government actively manages the economy,
Hmm.
or, building safety nets to help people who are struggling.
Welfare programs, unemployment insurance, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or investing in infrastructure like roads and bridges.
Yeah, big government projects.
Hayek saw all of these things as dangerous steps toward a controlled economy,
Right.
but they seem to have had the opposite effect.
Yeah, they seem to work out pretty well for a lot of countries.
They did. So is it possible that Hayek missed something?
It's possible.
Did he maybe not consider that big corporations and financial institutions could end up with just as much power as governments or even more?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
He was so focused on the dangers of state power
Mm-hmm.
that he might have underestimated or maybe just didn't emphasize enough the potential for control and coercion,
Yeah.
even in markets without much regulation.
So even in a free market, there's still the potential for someone to become too powerful.
Exactly, because think about it. Private companies are driven by profit,
Right.
and often they have less accountability than the government.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
could they become just as dominant or even more so than a big controlling government?
That's a scary thought.
It is. And it leads us to this really interesting and maybe unsettling twist in Hayek's legacy.
Okay.
Instead of those government bureaucrats controlling the economy like he feared,
Mm-hmm.
we've seen these massive corporations and financial institutions rise up.
Yeah.
and they have a huge amount of influence over our daily lives.
So instead of the government being the big bad wolf, now it's megacorporations.
That's one way to put it. And it's here that we see the hand of neoliberalism at play.
Right.
Remember that philosophy we talked about that embraces a lot of Hayek's ideas about free markets and limited government?
Mm-hmm.
But instead of creating this utopia of individual freedom and widespread wealth like its supporters promised, it seems like neoliberalism might have accidentally set the stage for the very concentration of economic power that Hayek warned us about.
It's almost like they paved the road to Hayek's serfdom,
Yeah.
but took a different route to get there.
Exactly. It's a fascinating paradox.
It is. So let's dive into some concrete examples of how this plays out in the real world.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, I'm ready. So we've got these, massive corporations and financial institutions with all this power, but how does that actually play out in our everyday lives?
Yeah, good question. It's not always obvious.
Yeah. Can you give us some real world examples?
Absolutely. Let's start with something as basic as housing. In a lot of cities, buying a home is just completely out of reach for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So they're forced into renting. And who are they renting from increasingly?
Yeah.
It's these huge corporate landlords.
So instead of renting from, a mom and pop landlord, it's like some giant corporation.
Exactly. These mega landlords who own tons and tons of properties.
Okay, so what does that mean for renters?
Well, it means these corporations have the power to really drive up rents.
Oh, wow. So they can just charge whatever they want.
Pretty much, especially when people don't have a lot of other options.
Yeah.
And it's not always about individual landlords being greedy,
Right.
It's this bigger systemic issue.
Okay.
We've seen housing become what they call financialized,
I've heard that term.
which basically means it's viewed more as an investment for wealthy people than a basic human need.
So it's like housing is treated like stocks or bonds or something.
Exactly. A way to make money, not a place for people to actually live.
Yeah, that makes sense. And this is all happening while affordable housing options are shrinking.
Right. It's like a double whammy.
Yeah, for folks who are just trying to, get by.
Absolutely. It's tough out there.
So you've got these rising housing costs, but are there other ways that this kind of corporate power dynamic is impacting people?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's not just rent, right?
It goes way beyond housing.
Okay.
Think about the gig economy.
Yeah.
Companies like Uber and Lyft and DoorDash, they're everywhere.
Yeah, they're ubiquitous.
They sell this idea of flexibility being your own boss,
Right.
which sounds really appealing to a lot of people.
Oh, yeah, especially if you need a side hustle or just want more control over your schedule.
Exactly. But the flip side is that gig work often comes with really low pay, no benefits, and zero job security.
So you're kind of constantly hustling.
Yeah, you're at the mercy of the algorithm.
Yeah.
And the company takes a big cut of what you earn.
So it's like you're renting out your labor to these platforms.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
But without the same protections and benefits that traditional employees have.
Exactly. It's a trade-off flexibility for security.
What are the long-term consequences of that kind of trade-off?
Well, it creates a workforce that's very vulnerable, constantly hustling, often without a safety net.
And then you've got the financial industry.
Right, which adds a whole other layer to this.
Yeah, think about credit card debt, student loans, payday loans.
All of it, yeah.
They can really trap people.
Absolutely. In a cycle of debt, that's really hard to escape.
It's almost like a modern-day version of indentured servitude.
Yeah, it's a powerful analogy.
You're beholden to these financial institutions just to, stay afloat.
Exactly. And all of this is happening within this system that Hayek's followers helped to create.
Right.
A system that was supposed to maximize individual freedom.
But it seems like it's doing the opposite for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a real paradox.
It is. So if this is the reality for so many people, what can we do about it?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah, is there a way to turn this around? Can we fix this system?
Well, I don't think it's about demonizing all corporations or saying that capitalism is inherently evil.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that the way the system is set up right now just isn't working for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to rethink some of those core neoliberal ideas that we talked about.
Like the ones that prioritize free markets above all else.
Exactly.
So are you saying that we need more government intervention?
It's not necessarily about going back to a super heavily regulated economy.
Okay.
It's about finding a balance.
Yeah.
Hayek was right to be cautious about government overreach. But we also have to recognize that the market doesn't always self-correct.
Right. It's not perfect.
Sometimes it needs a little nudge in the right direction.
Okay. So what would that nudge look like? To give us some concrete examples. So, okay, we've talked about the problems, but like, what are some potential solutions? Like, where do we go from here?
Well, I think one place to start is with housing. We need to kind of shift our thinking and start seeing housing as a fundamental right,
Okay.
not just another commodity,
Mm-hmm.
something to be bought and sold.
Right.
And that means we need to invest in public housing,
Okay.
create more options for affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
And we also need to look at policies that prevent those mega landlords we talked about from, just jacking up rents and pushing people out of their homes.
So using the government to create a system that's a little bit fairer for renters.
Exactly, kind of leveling the playing field a bit.
Okay, what about the gig economy?
Yeah.
Those workers are in a really tough spot,
Yeah, they are.
caught between, these high housing costs and unstable jobs.
Right.
How do we make things better for them?
Well, I think we need to make sure that gig workers have the same basic rights and protections as anyone else.
Okay.
Things like a guaranteed minimum wage,
Okay.
access to health care,
Mm-hmm.
other benefits, and the right to organize and negotiate for better conditions.
So it's almost like we need to update our labor laws for the 21st century.
Exactly.
Recognize that work is changing,
Mm-hmm.
but basic rights should still apply.
Absolutely.
What about the financial side of things? You mentioned like predatory lending and people getting trapped in debt.
Right.
Any solutions there?
Well, I think we need to really crack down on those predatory lending practices.
Okay.
Things like payday loans with these insane interest rates.
Yeah.
They just prey on people who are already struggling. We need stronger consumer protections,
Okay.
more transparency from financial institutions,
Yeah.
and maybe even consider public banking options
Yeah.
that provide fair and affordable services to everyone.
So it sounds like, it's not just about one magic bullet solution.
No, it's not.
It's a mix of stronger regulations,
Right.
empowering workers,
Yeah.
and maybe exploring these new models like public banking.
It's about a fundamental shift in how we think about the economy.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that the market can be a powerful tool,
Yeah.
but it needs guardrails.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it needs a little help from the government
Okay.
to work for everyone, not just those at the top.
It's almost ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a way, that Hayek was so worried about government control, but maybe what we're seeing now is a different kind of control.
Yeah.
Controlled by these big corporations, enabled by the very system that was supposed to promote freedom.
It's not as simple as, government bad, market good.
Right.
It's about recognizing that both have their pitfalls
Yeah.
and finding ways to create a system that balances individual freedom with collective well-being.
So where does this leave us? What can we as individuals do to create that balance?
Well, I think the first step is to stay informed.
Okay.
Educate yourself about these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Understand how these systems work.
Okay.
And don't be afraid to question the status quo.
Knowledge is power.
Absolutely. And then get involved.
Mm-hmm.
Support organizations that are working on these issues.
Yeah.
Vote for candidates who prioritize economic fairness.
Mm-hmm.
And don't underestimate the power of your own voice.
Yeah, it can feel overwhelming sometimes, but it's important to remember that we're not powerless.
Absolutely.
We can shape the world we want to live in.
You can?
Hayek's warning about the road to serfdom, even if it's playing out differently than he imagined, it can serve as a wake-up call,
Yeah.
Reminds us that we need to be vigilant, engaged, and willing to fight for a future where everyone has a chance to thrive.
I think that's a great note to end on.
Yeah, well said. And to our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
Yeah, definitely.
What does economic freedom mean to you, and what role do you want to play in shaping a more just and equitable future?
Big questions.
They are big questions. Keep those questions in mind as you navigate the world around you. Thanks for joining us.